All right, welcome to Radical Books and Politics. It's been a while, and you are listening to the wonderful music of Adam Gottlieb of One Love. And we're here. So honored to have Lou Rosenbaum back again to Radical Books and Politics. I know it's been a minute. I've been away for a while. Now I'm back. Woo, in full force. Hey, thank you, viewer. Please feel free to add any comments or questions. Here we go. Somebody's viewing. Good. So Lou, this show is actually inspired because I got into like a I don't want to say it was just a good conversation about what's going on in Ukraine, and I had posted a banner on Facebook and Twitter that said no sanctions against Russia. And I know the terminology is problematic. Well, basically what I was saying is no sanctions against the people of these various countries because they're not the ruling class. So the question is, well, if you can't just the person responding, well, if you can't justify uh, if you have a better solution than sanctions, what is it? And the reality is, I don't have a solution, but I would like to talk more about the situation at hand because it's not so cut and dry as the media is making it out to be. So,
yeah, that's true, and I think your point about no sanctions really is that we shouldn't be urging something that's going to hurt the people of other countries. At least in times of war, our main focus should be on stopping the war makers. That's what should be our main focus. And there are very many ways to do that, but in our country in particular, the main way to do that is to focus on our own war makers and to recognize that the situation that is unfolding in the Ukraine is something that has been prepared for years by the United States and NATO. And it's not no accident that it's happening. So I just wanted to start off by saying that.
I agree, and that's the thing, that this isn't something that just sparked,
right?
And so maybe if you could speak to some of that history, that would help to contextualize for some really good meaning people that believe sanctions will stop fascism.
Right. Well, I think that usually the way that's couched is, well, what about, would you rather we go to war? And I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that's the binary. I don't think it's a question of sanctions or go to war. So let's talk a little bit about the history. First of all, most of what we're seeing now really began to play out at the end of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of World War II, the United States, which had been in alliance with the Soviet Union to crush Hitler, immediately about-faced, and it saw its task as to, they called it contain communism, but it was never a matter of quote-unquote containment. It was a matter of crushing the Soviet Union. That was their goal. And to do that, they established this organization called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, there are some people who are calling it a defense organization. It's a defense organization against the communists. Well, the communists have never threatened Europe militarily, but there was a NATO organization there to actually get in position to attack the Soviet Union if needed, if possible. And that's what NATO was intended to do. It was established in 1949. Within fast forward to the point where the Soviet Union fell apart. At that point, the United States actually urged Russia. They actually came to an agreement in which the United States denuclearized the Ukraine. Ukraine had quite a few nuclear weapons at that point, but under an agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union pulled its nuclear weapons out of Ukraine, and that placed Ukraine in a position of being a buffer country between, at that point, Russia and Eastern Europe, the rest of Eastern
Mm.
Europe. None of so much of this, the conversation today assumes that the Ukraine is an independent country which has its own goals and so forth and so on. And of course, there are people there who do. But the reality of politics, geopolitics in the world, is that the great powers manipulate the smaller powers for their own interests. And so you have the what were the so-called people's democracies, the countries that had been aligned with the Soviet Union, like Poland, like Hungary, like Romania, Albania, and so forth. All of those countries, bit by bit, joined NATO. And remember again, NATO is not a defense organization. It has nothing to defend. It is an aggressive organization. And so by doing that, the United States immediately placed its um, um,
Interests?
interest intention as putting weapons on the border of the Soviet Union. And that was actually accomplished by establishing bases in countries from the Baltic Sea all the way through the people's democracies, what had been the people's democracies, into Turkey, and then most recently, within the last few years, into the state of Georgia, which
Mm.
was now Georgia is certainly. I mean, it is now applying for membership in NATO.
Mm.
It hasn't been granted there are steps that you get in order to have to go through in order to become part of NATO. You have to establish a plan for doing that. It's called an MAP. I don't remember what the initials stand for, but you need a plan. And each of the countries that have joined NATO have had that plan. Currently, there are 3 countries that aspire to be part of NATO. One of them is Bosnia-Herzegovina, and that's the only one that has such a plan in place. It's one of the Eastern European former people's democracies.
Tell your wife I said bless you, Lou.
Diana, Jesus says bless you.
Oh, thank you.
But the other 2 countries are Ukraine and Georgia.
Mm.
Both of those countries, unlike the people's democracies, which were, now remember, we were talking about whether or not these countries have independent interests. Yeah, of course they have independent interests. But the way in which, after the Second World War, things worked out is that a treaty that the United States, Britain, and France, and the Soviet Union agreed to put the quote unquote people's democracies within the camp of the Soviet Union. And I have to this is a brief anecdote. My father was a stamp collector. And I remember looking at his stamp collection. He collected United States stamps. And I remember his one set of stamps that he got in the 1940s that had the flags of all these people's democracies,
Mm.
and the United States issued these stamps, but they called the stamps the captive nations stamps.
Well, that was honest.
Yeah,
You
right?
know, I mean, this
Well,
is a really great history because I think when people hear NATO, they use the I don't know, the jargon, peacemakers, peacemaking
right,
force,
right,
when clearly there's politics involved, and
right.
even this whole idea of the United States supporting NATO. I'm like, look, either way, you're going to be shooting bullets. You know, I mean,
Right.
and their acts of aggression. I'm sorry, I often get irritated by how the United States represents its invasions of other countries. You
Right.
know, and this is one of those cases. So one of the things I did read in a really great rally article, and it is from 2015, but the issues are still relevant. It's not that long ago. Is that there are these economic blocs like
Right.
India, China, the Soviet Union, the United States. Can you maybe talk a little about that? Because I think this will help contextualize too what's happening in that part of the world.
Yeah, well, the United States would really like to be the top dog. There's no doubt about that, and they're acting like it right now. But they've had to recognize since pretty much since the early part of the 21st century, when China's economic strength became so much greater. Um, just step back for a minute. Once the Soviet Union was dissolved, Russia's actual economic strength was really very much undermined. So, what's happened since then is that China has become the United States' major competitor. It's got an economy almost the same size as the United
Mm-hmm.
States. It has some of the most advanced technical capacity of any country in the world, and so it's a competitor for the United States. Well, in order to be able to respond to both Russia and China, the United States has had to strengthen groupings like NATO. It's had to strengthen. I mean, there was this attempt for a time for the Pacific. Can't remember even what the rest of the acronym was now, but there was the what would have been something like NAFTA for the Southeast Asia, um, and that fell through
Right.
for a number of reasons. But China has actually constructed one, and
Mm-hmm.
China is constructing through its Belt and Road Initiative an entire network, an infrastructure that is competing with the United States worldwide. Just one quick thing. I mean, a lot of this is in advance over that 2015 article because although some of this was clear then, what is even clearer now is that the United States has basically looked at places like Africa as throwaway parts of the world,
Mm.
whereas China has, in the last 15 years or so, has spent a great amount of effort building its relationships with the various movements in China, various countries in China. In fact, going back even to the 1980s, China, while the United States tried to undermine Angola, for example, the government of Angola,
Right.
China was busy building a railroad from Tanzania to Angola across that whole section of Africa. And that's what China has been doing has been building up the infrastructure in these countries. And I think we should, for the moment at least, ignore whether or not that was environmentally a good thing to do. That's not the important point. The real important point is the United States wasn't interested in developing infrastructure at all. It was mostly interested in maintaining the poverty in these countries at the worst level. So what the result has been that China has made tremendous inroads into what the United States considered its sphere of influence. And keep in mind, the United States considers the whole world its sphere of influence.
Right.
So,
And that's really interesting to me because it also goes to show why China now is so industrialized. Because if you look at our country, I mean, I just heard recently that farmers aren't growing food in California. Well, where is it being grown in third world countries, underdeveloped countries or whatever? And I almost think that that's in some way strategically smarter than our approach, which has been to not support democracies, to keep countries impoverished, and frankly, to make a lot of money out of the weapons industry. And so,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't
No,
mean
I
to
mean,
cut
it's
you off.
just it's horrible. It's awful because I also think that even though it's not there yet, I remember during the first Iraq war that people were saying it was going to improve the economy of the United States, and that wasn't the case. because we don't have industrial jobs. We're not creating jobs. If anything, when people were rebuilding Iraq or whatever, people like Cheney made out like bandits, and it wasn't like this created jobs for Americans. And the soldiers didn't also have a very good life compared to the officers. They were living poverty wages. I mean, I remember there were parents that were sending them like armor because the military is so underfunded. So, and I'm not promoting war. I'm just saying that when it comes to the values of this country, the leaders and rulers of this country, it's not for our well-being. It's for profit, right? And so I'm sure they're looking at this war with the Soviet Union as a way to put themselves above everybody else. But the U.S., I think, is going to come to a rude awakening. I think China, even just how it trains its citizens, has a much larger army than we do, right? And I hate for this to become a. I know people also have been talking about nuclear war, and how the rulers have promised not to have a nuclear war. Well, what would stop them, Lou, really from going to war and making us their cannon fodder or doing something worse? Really,
The only thing that would make them uh, unwilling to go to nuclear war is the recognition that their own country would be decimated as well, and it might be them. I mean, here this mutually assured destruction is what has been something that has been keeping people from actually engaging in a nuclear war for I don't know how many years now. There is that threat.
of course.
Um, the Russians have actually more nuclear weapons than we do, although ours are probably a little bit more sophisticated. But both of these countries, both the United States and Russia, could wipe out the rest of the world probably 3 or 4 or 5 times over. So it's not going to bode well for anybody who uses nuclear weapons first. The first strike is not going to result in any benefit to anybody at this
No,
point.
not at all. I think a lot about. I know this movie came out during the Reagan era when he and Gorbachev were muscling and just it seemed like the possibility was there. Even as a child, I recognized something was very wrong. And the movie the day after came out. Do you remember that movie?
I remember that it came out, but I never saw it.
Well, there is a scene where the missiles just go and nobody knows who's attacked, but it doesn't matter because the country's devastated.
Yeah,
And I mean, I think that these people are visionless if they're even considering that, because once you destroy the planet like that, there is nowhere to run. I mean, the bunkers that they plan on having are only going to hold so far. Got to grow food. You got to have clean water. But I mean, that's the worst case scenario. But people have been telling me, well, I'm making plans in case this happens, and I'm like, you can't make plans in case this happens. This is it.
right,
You
right,
know.
right. Yeah, when I was very young, believe me, I was once upon a time. When I was very young, it was in the 50s, and there was the threat of that the Eisenhower administration was raising about, the Russians have the atomic weapons and they can bomb us and shit like that. And we actually had drills to hide underneath desks in the schools as if that would do anything. But um, but at that point, there were so few nuclear weapons
Right.
compared to what we've got now. And even at that point, people were very frightened about the possibilities. And now, you're right. I mean, it would devastate the Earth. It may even make it impossible for us to carry on. Whoever's left to
Yeah.
carry on the civilization that we've got now, as limited as it is. We
No, I
would call
agree.
it civilization.
And that's a problem. So this question of sanctions, I think you pretty much addressed how they're not really going to benefit anyone. And but see, the thing is that people don't understand that when there are sanctions, it's the poor that are mostly affected, and there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor in the Soviet Union. I think the last statistic I saw was that 46% of the population was below the poverty line, which is really high. You know, I just what you spoke, but what can we do if not sanctions? What can people do? Right? I was
Well, I think the key thing in terms of stopping war and stopping our war makers, first of all, is to recognize that the only reason that they're in a position that they're in right now is because they cannot meet people's needs. In a certain sense, they're overseas right now or attempting to do what they're doing now because they can't solve the problems in America.
Mm,
Because, with millions and millions of people out of work or in poverty in this country, what are they going to do? So that's their weakness. And that's what we have to respond to. We're doing something to save the people of the Ukraine or the people of Russia for that matter by going after our war makers and their weakness, which is that they can't solve our problems. They shouldn't be spending that money for. I mean, they just sent a bunch of weapons to the Ukraine. Well, they should be spending money on housing the homeless here in Chicago.
right.
That sort of thing. That's what, and we need to double down on trying to attack that. That they've got to deal with that. Take the energy that they're spending on on deploying forces in Eastern Europe and turn that into what will benefit the American people.
So, for example, um, I don't know, offering. I'm not saying we should send troops in to defend the Ukrainians, but what if we took the military to do other things like help people during disasters, feeding people, medical corps? That's not just Doctors Without Borders. That kind of thing you're envisioning?
Well, that could be done. That certainly could be done. I mean, they could bring the troops back to Chicago and teach them how to be contact tracers
Mm,
and deploy them at the various schools around the city. Take their uniforms off, for God's sake, and take away their weapons, but teach them how to give vaccines, how to take COVID
temperatures.
tests, how
Yeah.
to take temperatures, and do contact tracing in the communities from which they came. For God's sake,
Right. Right.
I mean, this is what they could do.
Yeah,
Um,
in fact, that raises the people's response to COVID-19 is trying to put forth an ordinance, and
exactly.
one of the stipulations is that people in the community be hired to be contact tracers and testers. And I think people when they envision the military, they only think of war, but I think that there are other ways, and this is kind of an example. I had a poet that I represent, Mr. Juarez, who went to Oaxaca in Mexico, the mountains of Oaxaca. He's an indigenous person, and he was a police officer, and he was telling me what kind of work he was doing. He was helping like little old ladies carry their groceries. He was helping people when they were drunk to get home safely. He was keeping the peace during rowdy parties, and I don't believe he was even carrying a gun, but he was a peacekeeper. And that blew my mind, just that example, to say, you know what, he was cleaning bathrooms, like the public bathrooms, and he enjoyed it, and he was offering a service and still policing, so there wasn't any crime. I don't think there really would have been, but that right there, like I think our military, our young people who are sometimes they go into the military because they want to eat,
Sure.
right? And I've heard this from people who've gone to wars, like they didn't have a future, they couldn't make ends meet, they joined the
Right.
military because they know they're going to get their squares. There's their 3 square meals. But the thing is that I think at the heart, when people really love their country, they want to help others. You know what I mean? But how they're trained, I think, is also very dehumanizing. I often talk to veterans who've done a 180 after they've served, and they're very critical of the military, and
Sure.
and rightly so, or they even were wondering what the hell were we there for,
Right.
right? So I think I this is this I think you're right. I think urging, I mean, I imagine that there's going to be protests about this soon. I imagine that we're going to push our representatives, or try to, so they do the principal thing. And but this is there's so much that's wrong, and so much that's wrong with the message that the American people are hearing, you know, um, about this. But
That's why the demonstrations that you see in the streets now are all in support of Ukraine, as if that was going to make a difference,
Right.
as if that was the main point. And and I've got to say, I'm as much concerned or worried or anxious or angry about the destruction of people and infrastructure in Ukraine. Absolutely, but um, our focus, if it isn't on how we set the groundwork for what's happening in Ukraine, if we don't focus on that, we're missing the boat.
Right. It's just like we did in Afghanistan. You
Yeah,
know, I was telling somebody, even with those efforts, we've not once supported a democratic government. You know, there were times when Latin America, certain countries were begging the United States to support the democratic endeavors, and they did not. Why? Because they had corporate interests, and now they have military interests, resource interests, in Ukraine. Uh, and that's such a damn shame that people get bamboozled into thinking, yeah, we're there to liberate people, we're there to spread freedom and democracy, and no,
yeah. I was very upset the other day when I heard Joe Biden talking
ugh,
about how we're here to support democracy because that's who we are. And exactly, I'm thinking because that's who we are. I mean, that's the worst case of ahistorical, anti-historical bullshit. That
mm-hmm.
thankfully this isn't on radio, so I can say that.
Oh, it
But
will be, but we're not we can say bullshit.
yeah, and
Sirius, not FM or AM. It's going to be on Sirius XM. But that's the thing, and I think that's the reason why the right is also attacking critical race theory and history and wanting to revise it, because this is the history of the country. When I tell people that, just case in point, how many treaties did the United States keep with the Native Americans, the indigenous peoples? Zero, zero. Come on now, the country of freedom and democracy. Give me a break. But at the same time, the people in this country are so beautiful and idealistic. I think they need to be educated, and we need to offer a vision of what could be. And that's where I think that's part of the work that we have to do. Um, but this whole because we've made this argument before, right? The government needs to spend the money on us, on education and all these things that people need now: housing, utilities, food, jobs. I mean, I think that's the best contribution we can make for now. Um,
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the question. I mean, the question about supporting sanctions is a question about are we going to support our country? That's really, are we going to support our war makers in further devastating the countries that are involved right now and our own country? I
yeah,
mean, it's not just a question of gas prices, which is true, it is, they are going up, but the other thing to keep in mind, and this is something that is worthwhile thinking about, in a recent presentation that Putin made, he made some threats. He said that there would be some devastation greater than anybody has seen before, or something like that. I mean, it sounded like it was coming out of Trump's mouth, instead it was coming out of Putin's mouth. And most people assumed he meant nuclear warfare. But all they have to do, essentially, is to unpeg their gas, their oil from the dollar, and the Western economy goes down the tubes.
right.
That's all they have to do. And that is much more of a threat than any sanctions or nuclear war or anything else. And that's quite possible. So that's one of the things that once this thing is set in motion, which is what the ruling class in this country is doing, once this thing is set in motion, it's hard to say how it's going to get stopped. And
Yeah, exactly.
the only thing we can do is attempt not so much to stop the process, but to stop the war makers from devastating the world. And it, and when I say we, I'm really talking about our class, our working class. It's not you and me that's going to do this, for God's sake.
Right.
It's not half a dozen people sitting here in a room in Chicago, or even all. I'm not sure how many people are listening to this right now, but well, the three of us then. If the three of us together are not able to do a whole hell of a lot, but the people that we're in touch with is the class that can make a difference, and little by little anyway. And I think that's the goal at this point, is to launch that kind of understanding about what the role is of that section of society that is in the most trouble in this country.
Oh yeah. And I think, or at least I hope, and this is from being part of the anti-COVID movement here in Chicago, that people are starting to stand and make demands and do it very unafraid.
Right.
That I think is different. Even myself, I've seen a transformation in myself that I'm like, I don't care. I'm gonna say what I think. I don't care if you're corporate. I don't care if you're an attorney. I'm gonna stand up and fight for our worker demands, my family's demands. And that probably terrifies them. And I think too, the other thing that gives me so much hope is the youth that are so woke,
Mhm.
and
Right.
really understanding. Even my son is 12. We're having this conversation about what was happening in the Ukraine, and he had already read articles from different points of view, and he was coming to the understanding. He's like, Mom, this is BS, and he's 12, Lou. I didn't have to tell him a damn thing. Like, he came to me saying, this is BS. We shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be, you know what I mean? We shouldn't be sanctioning. And I was like, damn, it took me a long time to come to these realizations about the United States government. I was in college, but I had studied some alternative history. And then I started to learn about theory and other ways of seeing things. But there's something to be said for the youth that understand how important it is for them to have a future,
Absolutely.
and a clean earth and
Absolutely.
work and all that.
Hmm.
So that gives me hope, like a lot of hope.
I hear you. I hear you. I'm on the same path as you are on that, for sure. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, we're at 30 minutes, Lou. So thank you. I know it's been a very long day for you. It's always a pleasure to have you here. How can people get a hold of you? How about the Chicago Facebook group? That would be a good one to promote for people.
Sure. You can always contact me at the Chicago Learna Facebook page.
I'm gonna post
Um,
that right now.
I'm also on Facebook as an individual, so contact me that way.
What's your name? Is obviously your name is Lou Rosenbaum.
That's what I understand. Last time I looked at my ID, it said that.
So yeah, feel free to Lou. And Lou is pretty amazing. Lou also has a great vlog. So yeah, it was a real pleasure, Lou, and hope we get to. I know we're not going to stop having this conversation. I hope to have more guests on, even if they don't agree, to really talk about what does it mean to make the demands of our class primary as opposed to sanctions and other wars and whatever plans the ruling class has to keep themselves in power. But Lou, thanks again. We're going to end with a little bit of music by Adam Gottlieb. And two, I am going to invite y'all as part of our standing up. We are going to have a city council or a city hall, pardon me, I can't multitask, a city hall protest tomorrow on LaSalle at 9:30 a.m. We are mandating that the masks not be removed and that they continue to vaccinate people. As you know, the governor of this great state capitulated to parents that have been suing, but there's still a high number of people that are dying, and this new variant is going to be lethal. So hope to see you there 9:30 in front of LaSalle, in front of City Hall. Lou, hopefully I'll see you there. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you, viewer. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you as ever, Lou. This is your second home.
I'm happy to be here whenever you want me.
Thank you.